Hi everyone, it's Teresa from Indigo Niche and welcome to part one of our Finding Steps Sewalong. So we are in the height of midsummer here, so I thought it was the perfect time for us to sit and enjoy some quiet stitching time. We are going to progressively work through our Finding Steps panel that we've got, and we just enjoy the different stitching techniques. So it's suitable for all skill levels. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive right into it and get started with our stitching. So what we've got, just a quick rundown of our supplies. What we've got is we've got our Finding Steps panel. So we've got two different Finding Steps panels. We've got number 1 and number 2. The designs are quite similar. They're complementary. They work perfectly together. So they are essentially they're two halves of a set. So you can work with one or the other, but the stitching designs complement each other beautifully. So we have it in an indigo and we have it in a cream. Now I'm going to be stitching it under the camera. I'm actually going to be stitching it on the cream version simply because I find that the indigo panel tends to flare a little bit because of the depth of colour of the panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be stitching on the cream because you can see the stitches really clearly on there, but I'm going to be stitching with a lovely variegated blue. And then for our borders around our segments or our cobblestones, I've got a nice mid blue colour. What I will do, just to keep you, for those girls that are, or those of you that are stitching on the indigo panel, I'll actually stitch an indigo panel off camera, and I'm just going to stitch it in a beautiful white thread so that you can see exactly what we're up to, and I'll just show you each video. You can just see what it looks like on the indigo panel as well, because it does look quite different. It's amazing how much difference it looks when you change the background color of the fabric. So our supplies that we need, we've got our panel, we've got it in the indigo, and I've got the cream. We need some Sashiko thread. I've got the variegated blue, I've got the plain blue, I've got a white for the background. We need a Sashiko needle, which I've got here already pre-threaded for me, and we need a pair of thread snips or some small pair of scissors. So, and maybe you'd like a cuppa or something to go with it. So I'm just going to have a little sip of my coffee so I don't start coughing. And what we're going to do is I'm going to change to the other camera and we're going to get started with our thread preparation, which is step 1. So let me just swap cameras and go. Just going to move these out of the way. And excuse me for my little bit of a cough. Right, so we've got our white Sashiko thread here. What's important is the colour number on the back here, which is 101. So that if you need to buy more Sashiko thread, you need to know the colour number so that you can buy the same thread. So we're just going to slide the cardboard tube off. Don't rip it, slide it off. We're going to use it again in a minute so that we know what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to look for the little area of the thread. It's quite difficult in the white to see this. So where you can see the little loop around. What it is, it's a little knot, and what it is, it's the beginning and the end of the skein has actually been knotted together. Just going to open that up. You can see that you've got that little knot there. Don't cut that, leave that attached. And then what we've done, just curl that around so that you can see, here's our knot here. Just pushed it, pulled it down, and we're going to snip through these threads at the bottom. It's a bit hard to see all under the camera in one go. So what we've got sorry about that. What we've got is we've got our 100 meters of thread. We've clipped it at the bottom. So what we've done is we've actually just pre-cut our entire 100 meters skein of thread ready for stitching. So that's nice and easy. We don't need to pre-cut any of our thread. It's all done for us. What we do need to do is I like to put this back on it, and I like to keep my thread organized so that we don't end up with a giant knot. So we've only got 100 meters in these, but you can imagine if you had a 300 meter skein of thread, how much of a knot you could certainly end up with if you didn't manage your thread correctly. So this is what I recommend that you do. There's a variety of other ways of doing it, but I find that this is just the quickest and the easiest, and I also find that I never get any knots or tangles with my threads. What we're going to do is we're actually going to braid it together. So from this side, I'm going to take a portion of the thread. I'm going to move it into the middle. And from the left-hand side, I'm also going to take a portion of the thread. It doesn't have to be the same amount. You don't have to count your threads or anything like that. Just take a portion of the thread and just move them down into the center. So what you then have is you will have, join these together, 3 portions of thread. We're just simply going to braid those together. Now normally what I would do is I would get someone to hold these for me, and we want to braid them into a nice, quite a relaxed braid. We don't want it too tight because we need to be able to pull the thread from the top. So this will just stop our thread getting in a giant tangle. Now, if you don't take anything else away from this little sew along, but this helps you learn to manage your thread, I'm happy, but you will learn heaps more. All right, so you may find when you get to the end that your ends of your thread are a little uneven. That's okay. We just want to manage it so it doesn't end up in a big knot. And you will find that you'll be able to braid it a little bit neater when you've got someone else holding that top edge for you. I actually braid almost all the way to the end. Okay, so what we've got is we've got our thread that's braided, and when we want to store it, I just simply roll it up. And so we don't ever end up with thread in a knot. When we're ready to use our thread, what we do, I'm going to go up closer to the camera, just grab a thread and we just hold where the label is with your left hand and pull the thread with your right. Now you will experience some tension. So you can see in the background there, you can see is that braid is actually scrunching up. Now if I just pull one side of the thread at a time, you can see the thread is coming out, and then I pull the other side. It does have a little bit of tension on it. This is why we don't braid it too tight. And there's our thread pre-cut to length, ready to stitch. The remainder of our thread is still neat and tidy. You can pop it in our bag and we're ready to go. That's all there is to preparing our threads. I'm going to put these aside and I'm going to swap panels. I'm going to swap to the cream panel simply so that you can see it a little easier under the camera. Okay. It just shows up a little bit better under the camera. Right, so what I'm going to do is we're going to start stitching on this little segment here. So what I've got is I've got one of my variegated blue threads. I've threaded my needle, my Sashiko needle. I'm actually just going to tie a little knot in the end. Now we'll go into more detail about starting and finishing methods as we go along, but I know that all you want to do at this point is you want to dive in and you want to start stitching. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to dive in and we're going to start stitching. So what we're going to do is we're going to work on this. This is called kakushipu, the diamond shape. I'll talk more about the origins of the designs and the names as we go along, but today we want to start stitching. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the thread pile. Now I'm left-handed, so I'm going to be stitching left to right, and for those of you that are right-handed, you're going to be stitching probably from right to left. But you can turn the fabric around as many times as you like in whatever orientation that you like. It's all fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk to you about the thread path for this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to start our stitching here. I might just use a lid pencil. Oh, sorry, I just bumped the phone with I'm recording on my phone. I just bumped it with my head. So we're going to stitch along here, and then we're going to stitch up to here and across. We're going to carry our thread and we're going to come back and stitch along here and back to here, and then we're going to stitch our straight row. All right, so you'll notice that we're not using a hoop. So what makes sashiko stitching a little different to crewel embroidery is that we don't use a hoop. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be loading the fabric onto the needle rather than going up and down with each individual stitch. So I'm just coming up from the back of my fabric at the beginning of my first stitch. And pull my needle through. Okay. And you can see I'm just at the beginning of my first stitch. I'm going to place my needle on the fabric, and I like to place it quite flat rather than trying to stab it in. So place the needle flat on your fabric, lift the fabric up, and the needle will go through. Going to slide the needle down. I'm just going to move it up closer to the camera. Slide the needle along, and I'm going to push the fabric down with my thumbnail and lift it, and the needle will come through. Slide the needle through to the end of the next stitch. Lift the fabric up, slide it along, push the fabric down, slide it along, lift the fabric up, and slide it along and push it down. So what we can see is we've come to where we're starting our row of stitches, which go across this way. Now you can see on here the size of our stitches on our needle. Now they are not 100% perfectly the same size. If I wasn't happy with the size of the stitches, what I would do is just slide the needle out and do it again. So I am going to just do it again to show you. Push it down, up, down, up, down. What you'll find, for a little bit more even, what you'll find is that not only do you get straight rows of stitching by doing it this way, it actually becomes quite quick. So we've got a mid-length needle for our sashiko. You can get a much longer needle, particularly if you're doing really long straight rows of sashiko stitching, but because we're changing directions quite frequently, it's easier to use like a mid-sized needle. So I'm going to just pop my thumb where my thread goes into my fabric. You can see, just pop my thumb on there. Okay. And I'm going to just turn my fabric around a little bit. And I am going to just do my row of stitching. So I'm lifting my fabric up, pushing it down, slide the needle over, lift it up, push it down. Now when we get to the center, what we're going to do is we're going to carry our thread across to the back. And I can load all of these stitches on my needle in one go. Now you might find as you're beginning to stitch that you can only load 2 or 3 stitches on at a time, and that's fine. What you'll find as you stitch more is that you gradually just start adding more stitches on without even realizing. So you can see I've carried across underneath the center. Just going to pop my thumb where my thread goes into the fabric. Just as soon as I pull that needle through. Just if you pop your thumb where the thread goes into the fabric, it actually stops it tangling as much. It's actually really difficult to stitch while you're trying to watch and make sure you're under the camera, plus watch where you're stitching as well. So feel a little disjointed with my stitching. So don't pull your stitches too tight. What I do is just run my finger along so that it's just sitting nice and flat. Now the other thing that we want to do is to get nice corners is where we're changing direction with our thread. The thread just needs a little bit of room to change direction. So I'm going to just flip it over to the back. And you can see here, this is where it's changed direction. So it's come down and it's changed direction. What we're going to do is I'm going to just grab that thread with my needle and just give it just a tiny little tug so that you can see that you have the slightest little bit of a bubble on the back there. And now when you look at the back, at the front, what you'll find is that your stitches are actually turning at the correct angle. If you don't give your thread that little breath to be able to turn, what happens is you end up with a curve shape, and this just helps give you a nice straight change. So I'm going to do my last 3 stitches in this row. And I am going to pull those through. And again, make sure it's nice and smooth, not too tight. Make sure I've got that little breath of thread underneath. What I often do is I can actually feel it with my finger. So I will just give it a little breath. And we're now going to carry our thread across and we're going to stitch back this way. So I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to stop talking and actually concentrate on my stitching for this one. Just make sure when we carry our thread across, again, we've got that little, you can just see that the thread is not sitting completely flat against the fabric. It's just that little breath of thread. I think it's technically called a bridge. Okay, so not too tight with your stitches. And of course with this section what we're going to do is we're going to carry our thread and we're going to stitch all the way across. Now, if any of you have ever done regular crewel embroidery, you can see that this is a whole lot quicker. Okay, so now what I've done on purpose here, actually pulled my thread too tight. You can see how it's all crumpled up there. What I'm going to do is we're going to smooth it out from the area that we've stitched to the free end of the thread. And then what we're going to do is give our fabric a little tug on the bias in both directions, and what that does is it just helps loosen up our stitches a little bit. We are going to then do our last 3 stitches here. And I'm going to come up at the end of the first stitch for my straight row down the centre. Now my tail's caught in there and I have pulled that way too tight. Okay, just make my tail a little shorter. I'm going to stitch all the way across. When you've loaded your stitches onto your needle, you can just have a look, and if you're not happy with them, just pull the needle out. and reload them if you choose to, if you need to. Just move that fabric around. Going to carry underneath there, and I'm going to load these few stitches on here for you. There we go, there's our first little row stitched. So then what I would do is I would stitch down here and back up into here, and then I would be able to stitch this segment, and I would go across, and I would just progressively get each segment done. Now there's suggested pathways. If you find that you have stitched yourself into a corner and you can't actually move, there's nowhere to be able to carry your thread across to start stitching, you can simply end your thread and restart your stitching. I'm going to be making this into a table runner. I will be putting backing and wadding on it, so we'll be quilting it. So I would be more likely to carry my thread a little further than what I would do is if I was just putting a backing on it. I don't want my thread to be able to catch anywhere, and also you can't see through it. So our fabric's slightly heavier than a regular patchwork fabric, but you can still see some shadows through the fabric. So you do need to be really careful if you're stitching. For example, I've got cream fabric and I've got a navy thread. So I am going to need to be a little bit careful about how far I carry with my thread. Generally, I don't like to carry my thread across on the back any more than about a centimetre. Having said that, if it's a quilt top and it's going to be heavily quilted, I know that I'm going to be quilting across those rows of stitching. I am inclined to carrying it more like to 2 centimetres. If there's any possible way I can weave it through other stitches that are there to get myself to the next portion of stitching, that's something that I'll do as well. So we have 3 segments of, actually what I'll do before we go any further, I'm going to show you how I finish off my thread. So I'm just going to take this to the back. And you can see that I have got all my stitches on the back. Now, there is a variety of ways of doing this. I'm just going to show you one way, and that's simply because I know that you're all really enthusiastic to get in and start stitching. I'm going to show you alternatives as we work through the process for those of you that are going, I can't use a knot, I can't use a knot. It's purely a personal choice. If you don't want to use a knot, I am going to show you some alternatives. So for today, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply take my needle underneath that thread. That's where I've carried across from one portion to another, and I'm going to just take my needle through that loop that forms, pull that knot. Now I'm not doing it tight, so just a relaxed knot, and then I go underneath one stitch. Try not to split the thread. Okay. And I'm going to clip my thread. Take that up to the camera. So you can see that it's not a tight knot that I've done. And by going underneath this stitch, what it does is it just holds my tail in place so that it doesn't roam all over the place. So I have got my knot to start with. Okay. Now, some of you will be happy using a knot and some of you won't. So we will explore that a little bit as we go along. But you'll find that you have, it's quite neat on the back, but you do have carried threads. So for those of you that feel the back should look the same as the front, it's not going to look the same as the front. All right, so we have got a few little portions of this to get stitched. So we've got one here. We have got one here. And we've got a little rectangle one here. So there's 3 portions of the kakishipu. Now, for those of you that are using Finding Steps number 2, you will have the same design, but it will be in different size blocks. So you just go through and find them. It's purely up to you when you do this stitching around the outside. I'm going to say that for the moment, I'm actually going to leave them. I will stitch probably a few of them at the same time. So I'll probably stitch this one and this one at the same time. For my brain patterns, what I would like to see is I like to stitch this, then stitch all of the center. And then when I stitch around the outside, I can see that this unit, this cobblestone, is completely finished. And then this one is completely finished. So I wouldn't stitch it first. I would stitch it after I have stitched all of my design. And then I'll know that once I've stitched the outside that it's complete and I haven't missed any stitches. So that's our first segment for our stitching. Let me just change back to here. So that's our first steps. Our first steps. It is our first steps, isn't it? So that's our first portion of our Finding Steps Sew Along. Don't forget, if you haven't joined our Facebook group, Indigo Niche Sashiko Community, you're welcome to pop in there. Please answer the membership questions and agree to the group rules. We will be posting our progress in there. What I'm going to do, I've got some orders to pack, and then I am going to do some more stitching, and I'll post some progress photos. I'll also do some progress photos of the same portions on here. There we go. There it is. It's going to be stitched in white, so I will get those done, and then for part 2 we will move along to another segment. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and we will continue to learn as we work along with our stitching. Bye for now.